2 was a game that was launched quite poorly, if I'm to be kind, but I never ever lost love for the Total War series, and now, a ton of patches later, I'm back to Total War Rome 2 and enjoying some gameplay of it, which I'm deciding to share with you people, because that's what I do. I'm a tree. Regardless, let's get into what I did with my army, and let's get on the philosophy of what I'm doing and how I play. Now, one of the best things, in my opinion, that Carthage has, which is the faction I'm playing, and we will be focusing on what I'm doing versus Timur, and we will analyze his army in a moment, and our actions in this battle, because that's fun to me. So, what I have are 6 African pikemen units. Now, pikemen from the front are one of the best melee units in the game. From the rear, they are one of the worst. Quite simply, if you're facing pikemen, do not run headlong into the pointy things. If you run headlong into the pointy things, you lose. There's something else about my army. I have a ton of Cretan archers, which are one of the most expensive and one of the best pike units, archers in the game. They are quite simply the elite of bows, the cream of the crop. Now that's very good, I'm sure I hear you saying, but what's your army's weakness? Cavalry. I have, quite frankly, average at best cavalry. The Carthaginian cavalry units are quite simply mediocre, nothing special, run of the mill, and that's basically it. They are basically fillers to just say, yeah, I brought cavalry. However, that's not to say I'm not confident in the cavalry's abilities. They are good units. They're just not going to match my opponent's cavalry, which I'll get to later. However, I do have the late Libyan hoplites on my right flank being an outlier to support any movement by my cavalry. These 2 blocks of units will support each other, and I highly suggest that if your army's cavalry is weak, that you provide some cheap spear units such as late Libyan hoplites to support your cavalry, because even if your cavalry loses, which it often will, your late Libyan hoplites are good as cannon fodder for really delaying the fight and making it last for quite a lot longer, giving you time to crush your opponent with your archers and infantry. Now, that's basically my army in a nutshell. Let's look at Timur's army, and we'll pause the game and such so I can get a good look at Timur's army. He has, I believe it's 6 levy pikemen. Now these pikemen are quite simply inferior to my African pikemen and will not stand up to them in any regard. As you can see, he does have them chevroned up twice. That doesn't matter. My African pikemen will crush them and run through them like butter. However, Timur also has some pretty good missile units. The Persian light archers are a truly fantastic missile unit, and the Eastern slingers are also a very respectable slinger unit. However, despite this, I have the advantage in missiles because Cretan archers are pretty awesome. That is just how they roll, and they will destroy you with their arrows. However, Timur does have one incredibly profound strength in his army. Not all of his cavalry is revealed, by the way, but these Hellenistic cataphracts, or Hellenic cataphracts, my mistake, are very powerful cavalry units. They cost a ton of money, but if you can use them by getting them around into the flank of my pikes, destroying my bow units, both of which cannot stand up to a cavalry charge to the rear. If it's a pike, it will be destroyed from the rear. If it's a bow, it can't stand up to cavalry anyway. As well as these very impressive Hellenic cataphracts, he has some royal cavalry, these Bracian or Barcian royal, I think it's Bracian royal cavalry units that are incredibly powerful. And I haven't talked about my ally, but he's just a random player, and the Macedonian player is a player known as Indie Pride. Now, pausing the game real quick and looking at the tactical map, we can see that our enemy in yellow is surrounding and trying to envelop my ally, and I'm going to have to close this gap between me right here and the enemy that I'm facing, Mr. Timur. Now, the reason I want to do that is if I do not close this gap, and if I camp at this location, at my spawn, or even here, what will happen is Timur will start feeding his units on my ally, and my ally can't afford to be fighting both the Macedonian forces and the Bracian forces. I think that's how you pronounce it. I probably am butchering the name of the faction, but that's regardless. So I have to close this gap immediately as soon as I possibly can, because if I don't, my ally will not be able to hold out. Now, all this being said, something did happen that was unexpected, and that is quite simply the fact that my friend Indie Pride has not put his pikemen into the phalanx formation. And if you do not put your pikemen in phalanx formation, you can expect them to get shellacked in every way and crushed in combat. You have to put your pikemen in the phalanx formation. That's why you spend so much on buying pikemen. He simply forgot to do it. I've done it before. Just pro tip, basic tip. Number 1, put your pikemen into pike formation. It's just important. Speaking a little bit about Indie Pride, he has a ton of javelin men and pretty impressive cavalry as well. But my ally is able to withstand that with very impressive swords and some pretty astute playing. He has some good slingers, and I'm really actually impressed with how my ally hold up, considering I didn't know this fellow and I thought I might get shellacked with the bad ally. Now, as you can see, I have closed the gap between me and Timur, and what that means is suddenly he can't just feed troops to crush my ally willy-nilly. If he starts to feed his pikemen into crushing my ally, the Iceni, he's going to start to see me just dominate him even more on the infantry and skirmishing front. So I've done what I was needed, what was required of me, and I've closed that previous gap between me and Timur. However, taking another look at the map here, we can see that Timur is also going to really attack my right flank, where my Libyan hoplites are waiting for him. This is the advantage of taking hoplites, cheap hoplites, in this manner. They are a great deterrent against cavalry. They might not actually stop these cavalry from eventually destroying these hoplite units, but they will make him think twice about committing his cavalry into my right flank. With these infantry forces here, he is going to have a hard time flanking. And plus, with these hoplites here, I can devote my cavalry to other tasks and simply try to annoy his missiles, which I've tried to charge, and he had to push his levy pikemen up. Basically, I'm just trying to say to Timur that I am here and you cannot attack my ally. And by doing that, I'm actually going to help my ally quite a bit, because if I wouldn't have closed this gap, and if I didn't start pushing Timur a little bit, he would have just been able to funnel missile units and pike units into my ally behind Indy Pride and crush him. And that's one of the most important things that you can do, is prevent your teammate from getting double teamed, because if your teammate is double teamed, he's in trouble. Now Timur is going to feel quite spry to fight despite my hoplites, and he's going to try to get my missiles with his Royal Cavalry, and I'm just going to respond by pushing all my missiles behind my pikemen and trying to commit my cavalry into getting Timur's cavalry tied down. If I can destroy an enemy cav unit this early in the game, it will have huge implications on what's going to happen. Timur is going to feel even more spry, and he's going to start to advance his cataphracts. Now, this is where having all these units committed right here is a bad thing. I am not prepared to take a side hit from these Hellenic cataphracts. However, I very wisely kept one of my Carthaginian cavalry in reserve and 2 of my hoplites. On retrospect, I should have kept more cavalry in reserve. I should have only sent maybe 2 Carthaginian cavalry along with the hoplite. So the lesson here, ladies and gentlemen, is when you're dealing with one unit, you shouldn't commit to destroying that one unit so much like I did. I made a slight mistake, and now I'm going to probably pay for it, because look how unorganized this is, because I started chasing this unit. That being said, though, this unit has taken some good losses, so it wasn't for naught. But as you can see, these units are going to start to charge, but I am able to get my hoplites in position, and he's going to try to have second thoughts, but it's too late. Timur's cataphracts are committed to the fight, and he's going to have to stand up or try to pull out and take massive losses, because when you pull out, you do take quite a few losses. Regardless, he has his cavalry committed, and there's nothing really he can do about it aside from face the consequences. However, he's going to send 2 levy pikemen to really ensure victory on my right flank. And this again is the advantage of having these late Libyan hoplites. They are cannon fodder, but they are basically just standing there and slowing the fight down. And as you can see, he isn't going to get my archers with his cavalry. I'm at a point where I am confident enough that his cavalry is tied down and busy enough that I'm sure I can win a skirmish fight without worrying about cavalry getting into them, at least for a good while. Taking a look over at how my ally is doing, you can see that he's doing incredibly well against the pikemen because they are not in phalanx formation, and Indy Pride in desperation is going to try to pull out and put them in pike formation. However, it's much too late, and my ally is just going to advance with his lighter troops and destroy any pike unit that isn't in phalanx formation. He is going to be able to put some units into phalanx formation, but it's too late for Indy Pride. He should have had his pikes into phalanx. Regardless, I'm going to send African pikemen to counter Timur's movements of levy pikemen. My superior pikemen, now that they're organized, will really guard this right flank incredibly well. Now here's where Timur will make a mistake. He will commit these cavalry units to chasing down my 3 broken and fleeing units, and he's going to create a massive gap between the cavalry that he needs to win in this right flank, and basically I'm going to be able to crush these levy pikemen as Timur wastes his cavalry's movement, basically running after units that don't matter at this point in time. He is going to position his Hellenic cataphracts to change the tide of the battle over here, though. And this is going to be bad for me. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, you need to be careful with pikes against a cavalry heavy army, because I've taken massive losses. My morale is suddenly in the red for this unit, and they're going to rout really quickly because of that. And now, speaking of routing quickly, my archers are going to cause these levy pikemen to break really quickly, as well as my pikemen. If there's any unit in the game that'll rout quickly, it's going to be these levy pikemen, because they are going to get crushed by my African pikemen. Now, at this point, I was able to organize myself into a pike infantry line, and now this is the bad part about having weak infantry with heavy cavalry. With no infantry support, these Hellenic Royal and Royal Cavalry units will not be able to stand up to the African pikemen, and this is where having missile units becomes very important. It becomes important for the end game, for securing your victory, and they are incredibly important. As you can see from when I just cross my cursor over my missile units, these guys have been firing the whole time, and this unit has, for example, 83 kills. That's massive, especially considering a lot of those kills are also from cavalry. Now, these cavalry units are just not going to stand a chance against organized pikemen, especially with the missile fire support from my admittedly not so organized blob of archers. He has his missiles as well, but they at this point aren't going to save his cavalry from being shellacked by my pikemen. So, yeah. I'm also going to try to position myself right here with my hoplites, surround and crush the rest of his cavalry. Basically, these cavalry are in very big trouble, and they are immobile and going to get crushed in fine order by my hoplites, pikes, so on and so forth. And finally, the battle is basically secured for me as I rout his cavalry against my pikemen and still have my missiles firing. Even if I lost my pikemen, I might still win the battle for my missiles. So, really, honestly, one of the big things about Total War is knowing what you need to win. And in that case, all I needed were my pikemen and my Cretan archers. The hoplite units, this big old blob of dead bodies here, this right flank, was much less important to me in terms of individual unit value compared to Timur's Hellenic cavalry. So keep this in mind. If you have a chance to tie cavalry down, or heck, even elite infantry down with cheaper units, take it. Because you could win the battle if you just make sure that the opponent's units that are very important for his victory cannot be used against the units that you know that you'll win with. I knew I couldn't take on those cataphracts and Royal Cavalry just willy-nilly with my pikemen. They just would have crushed me. I would have gotten surrounded. So what I did was I just committed my troops and got them tied down. The goal was never to win against a battle that I knew I couldn't win against. I couldn't beat his cavalry. But because I tied them down and made sure they couldn't move against the units that were important to me, I won that battle against Timur. Regardless, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy yourselves, and I hope that I see you on the battlefield. Also, I really do have to thank my ally for being a really smart player and being really able to hold out quite well against Indie Pride's advance. So a lot of this is luck of the draw. I had a good ally, and Timur made some mistakes, and Timur is a great player. So good stuff. Good stuff. By keeping my archers alive and my pikes alive, I had the advantage. So just keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. Um, if you're going to win a battle, you have to fight the battle on your terms. And that can mean a number of things. It can mean a ton of things. For me, it was keeping my pikes and my archers alive. For Timur, it was getting around my infantry and crushing my pikes and my archers with his cavalry. And by preventing him from doing that, I won the battle. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've rambled on enough. Good day, and ciao. I'll see you on the battlefield.